through the writing process, revising. So this is one in a series of workshops, getting started, getting organized, introductions and conclusions, revising, and then editing is another one. So I'm just going to talk today about revising. A lot of people get revising and editing confused. Revising is where you take what you've done and you really go through it very carefully and you make changes to what you've done. Remolding, fixing, moving things around. Editing is simply the making sure that it all looks really nice. So when I'm getting dressed sometimes for a big event, I'll put something on and then I'll decide, no, I don't like these shoes, or I don't like this pair of pants, or I don't like this jewelry, and I take it off and I try something else on and I see how that works until I put the whole thing together. That's revising. Right before I go out the door, I look in the mirror one last time and I make sure my hair's okay and I check make sure my eye makeup's just fine. That's editing at the very last little bit of something. Straighten a collar, that's editing. Revising is where you really go back and you take what you had and you put it together in the very best way that you can so that it presents your information the best way you can. As I said, there's a whole step. You gather ideas, you organize them, you draft, and then you revise. And sometimes revising causes you to have to go back to gathering and organizing because it's not just a one-step thing. It's sort of cyclical. But this is the step that comes after you've really got something on paper. You've got some things that you've written. And this is really what makes the difference. While you've got something written, going back and doing that revising is what makes the difference between a C paper and an A paper. So we're going to talk today about 6 steps in revising your paper. Number 1, check your assignment very carefully. Go back and reread your assignment. If you've printed it out, go back and highlight the most important things of your assignment and make sure that you have all the parts that your assignment says you have to have. Does it say you have to have a certain number of sources? Does it say that you have to have a certain number of pages? Does it talk about whether you're supposed to be in APA or MLA format? Does it tell you how many paragraphs you have to have? All those things are really important. So make sure that you've got all the parts of the assignment very carefully checked. Then I want you to check your thesis statement. Go and check and see what you have for a thesis statement. You're not looking at your whole introduction, but just starting with that thesis. Is it very clear? Does it say what you want it to say without being confusing? Is it concise? Did you say in one sentence what you needed to say? Does it correspond to your paper? Your thesis is your claim that you're telling people, this is what I'm going to talk about in the rest of my paper. And if your paper doesn't match that, then it doesn't make sense. So it's kind of the roadmap for what you're going to be doing in the rest of your paper. So you want to make sure that it corresponds and revise it to match your paper as needed. So here's an example of a paper, and it's blurry on purpose because all I want you to see is usually your thesis comes at the end of your first paragraph. Okay, that's where you usually put it. Not always, but usually it comes at the end of the first paragraph. And so you should look at that first before you worry about the other parts. Now I want you to look at your body paragraphs. Your body paragraphs are the real meat of what you're talking about, okay? When you're thinking about, say, a sandwich, what's the most important part of the sandwich? It's the filling, right? It's what goes in the sandwich, not necessarily. The bread is nice, but it's the filler that's important. So the body paragraphs are what's really important to revising. So look at that. Make sure that each one of your topic sentences is directly connected to your thesis, and that's very clear for your reader. So sometimes I say just go look at each topic sentence by themselves. Does each topic sentence go back to that thesis statement? When you look at your paragraphs, are all the paragraphs developed about equally? For an academic paper, we usually want all the body paragraphs to be developed equally. So if you look at this sample that I have up here, I look at this one and I see that paragraph 4 is definitely shorter than 1 and 2. And in fact, 3 is a little bit shorter too. It looks like I was running out of gas by the time I got to paragraph 4. So I'm going to want to go back and look carefully at that paragraph and see if I could possibly add some ideas so that they're all kind of equally developed. Okay? Otherwise, it's like sitting on a three-legged chair and one leg's a little shorter than the other. It doesn't feel balanced to your reader. What do you do for support? These are all examples of things that you can use for support in your paper. Facts, statistics, examples, incidents, reasons, descriptive details, or expert statements. Expert statements have to have something special after them or with them. They need an in-text citation. Whether you've quoted or paraphrased, it needs an in-text citation. And then that needs to be on your references or works cited page. So it's good to use expert statements, and in a research paper you're going to do that. But make sure that you use an in-text citation to say that where that came from. Logical organization. Does it make sense? Is it organized in a way that your reader is going to understand? Did you use transitions? That will help go as the reader reads through. The one transition that I would caution you to use is in conclusion. Your reader, your professor understands that you're coming to the end, so you don't need to like hit them over the head and say, in conclusion this. They know that that's the ending. So that's something that a lot of times younger readers will do. We'll use that to guide them through, but by the time you get to college, you're probably not going to want to begin with in conclusion all the time. Correct in-text citations. Did you explain your citations? I call it Oreo cooking a quotation. For every quotation or paraphrase that you use, think of an Oreo cookie. It has what? Outer cookie, it has that nice fluffy in the middle, and then it has another outer cookie, right? If your quotation is or your citation, your paraphrase is the fluffy stuff, you want to start with something that leads into that quotation that tells them who is the expert that you're quoting and why, and where or when it came from. And then afterwards, you don't just want to leave that quotation hanging there, you want to say why it was important. You want to explain it afterwards. Okay, so think of an Oreo cookie whenever you have a quotation or a paraphrase. As you revise your paragraphs, a good thing to use is called radar. So one thing is replace words that are not specific, words that are overused, sentences that are unclear. And sometimes a thesaurus will help you with that. But make sure you know the correct meaning of the word before you just substitute. And sometimes when students are typing along and they'll see it's typed, it's underlined in red, and they'll very quickly choose the word that the computer suggests. Sometimes the computer doesn't choose the right word, so be very careful that you've got the right one there. Sometimes you need to add. The A in radar stands for add. You need details, descriptive adjectives, rhetorical and literary devices. Thesaurus can help sometimes there. Sometimes you need to delete things that don't belong, unrelated ideas, things you've repeated. If you've said it once, you don't need to say it a second time. Unnecessary ideas. Sometimes your words and phrases are just repeated. Or reorder. Make sure that everything's ordered in a way that your person can really understand. It's logical in its ordering, and each one's connected to the main idea. Replace, add, delete, reorder. Radar. Get your radar going. Once you've gone through your body paragraphs, now you're starting to look at the introduction and conclusion. So I want you to go back to your intro and make sure that your intro has an attention getter. What are some attention getters that you might use? A quote. If you use a quotation, you have to cite it. Okay, but it's oftentimes a very good thing to start with. Sometimes you want to start right with a dialogue. You know, many great authors start their books right with a dialogue. They get you right into the story by starting with some dialogue there. So that's another thing that you can use. Surprising fact. And oftentimes that also gets them going. Something that's surprising, something that's unusual. Or sometimes another thing that works well is a little story. We call that an anecdote, so a little story that gets them going. Did you put in some background information? You can't just have your attention getter and then your thesis. You have to have something that leads your reader from the attention getter to what it is you're talking about in your thesis. So check to make sure that that's very clear, and then that your thesis fits together. It shouldn't look like it was just glued on there, that it flows in with the other parts of the paragraph. Then go look at your conclusion, because your conclusion and your introduction are like the two slices of bread on that sandwich I mentioned earlier. They should match each other. When you have a sandwich, you don't want an onion roll for the top of the sandwich and a piece of rye bread for the bottom, right? Somebody's making a face at me. No. You want those to kind of match each other. So when you look at your conclusion, you want to, it should kind of be the opposite of your introduction. It starts with your thesis that's reworded, not the exact same way you set it up above in your introduction. Which is in some ways kind of a summary. Do not repeat everything that you said in your body paragraphs. That's what sometimes teachers tell like third graders to do, because they're just beginning to learn how to write, but you're not third graders anymore. So what I suggest after you do that is explain so what. Why was this important? Why is it important to you or to your reader to know this information you presented? And then, does it match or connect to your introduction? Does it hook back to what you did in your introduction? So that your reader feels like you've really wrapped things up with some sort of a clincher sentence at the very end. Have you ever had somebody just like end a conversation without saying goodbye on the phone? And you're like, wait, what happened? You don't want to leave your essay reader like that. You want to have something that says a nice way of saying goodbye when you close it. Then go back and check your formatting. Whether you were supposed to use APA or MLA. APA is probably used more often in college. And it's like two different versions of the same thing. Almost like looking at an HP computer and a Mac computer. You can kind of figure your way through one if you know the other one. And always go back and check your teacher's directions, because occasionally you have a teacher who says they want APA formatting, but they don't want certain parts of it. Like they don't want a title page all to itself. They don't want that extra wasted piece of paper. So check that. Are your citations correct? Did you cite every single piece of information that you paraphrased or quoted immediately after the paraphrase or quotation? And then is that listed in your references? Is the paragraphing and spacing correct? Both MLA and APA use indented paragraphs, and there should not be an extra space in between the paragraphs. So you need to check your spacing. On your references and your works cited, do you have a hanging indent there? Do you have all of that is correct? It just takes a second to figure out how to do that. Your references and works cited, are they correct? You don't want to lose points over something that's pretty easy to get in the correct format. We have all kinds of things like easy bib and noodle bib that can help you get that in the correct format. So only when you're finished with that are you ready to go into editing. And we do a whole workshop that talks a little bit more about editing, but just very quickly I want to let you know that editing comes after revising, and that's where you read it aloud, you look for the correct words, for grammar, for punctuation, get a second reader. That's where you do your final finishing touches. Let it rest and then reread it again. Accomplished authors will take something they've written, they'll do the revising, they'll do editing, they'll put it away in a drawer for months. They have months. You only have maybe a day or two, hopefully. But get your mind off of it and come back to it and read it again. Make sure when you're reading that you read every word you've written and not what you thought you were writing or what you meant to write. Read what's actually on the paper. Where can you get help? If you go to the webpage, you will find us with the writing, reading, and speech area, and there's a place where you can schedule an appointment, or you can call us or walk in, and we'll try our best to schedule an appointment at a time that's convenient to you. So thank you very much. And we're very glad that you were with us today to learn about revising.